one professor, one interview, and suddenly every assumption Washington held about information control in the Middle East collapsed in 72 hours. The reach, 50 million views across platforms. The cost to American narrative dominance, incalculable. And the weapon that did it wasn't a missile system or an economic sanction. It was a calm Iranian academic sitting in Tehran explaining exactly what the Pentagon doesn't want you to calculate. If that doesn't make you pause and reconsider how modern influence actually works, nothing will. This channel runs on no corporate funding, no government backing, and no advertising pressure telling us what to leave out. If this kind of analysis matters to you, the kind that examines how power actually shifts in the 21st century, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Because what happened with Professor Marandi is not just about one viral moment. It's about the irreversible collapse of Western monopoly on Middle Eastern narratives. Let me show you exactly what happened and why it represents something American strategists have been dreading for years. October 14th, 2024. Professor Mohammad Marandi, an Iranian academic based at the University of Tehran, appears on a British news program. Standard format. The interviewer attempts the usual Western media playbook: interrupt, discredit, frame the narrative, but something goes differently this time. Marandi doesn't just defend Iranian positions, he systematically dismantles every talking point with specific evidence, calm precision, and zero emotional reaction to provocations. The interview goes viral, not on CNN, not on BBC's main platforms, on Twitter, on Telegram, on WhatsApp groups across the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia. Within 48 hours, the clips accumulate 15 million views. Within a week, that number crosses 50 million when you count all platforms and re-uploads. Comment sections explode in Arabic, Urdu, Farsi, French, Spanish. The dominant theme, finally, someone who doesn't accept Western framing as the starting point of discussion. Here's what makes this significant. For decades, Western media operated as the default referee of Middle Eastern conflicts. They set the terms. They decided what counted as legitimate versus propaganda. They determined which deaths deserved mourning and which deserved footnotes. And that monopoly just cracked wide open. The official narrative from Washington and London: Marandi is a regime mouthpiece. Ignore him. He's just Iranian propaganda. Move along. The operational reality shows something different. Millions of people across the global south watched that interview and saw a confident, articulate representative of a non-Western power refusing to play by rules designed to make him lose. And they shared it enthusiastically. Now here's what almost nobody in Western strategic circles wants to acknowledge publicly. This isn't about whether Morandi's specific claims are right or wrong. This is about the collapse of gatekeeping. For 30 years, if you were an Iranian official or academic, you had exactly two choices when dealing with Western media: accept their framing and lose credibility at home, or refuse their invitations and cede the information space entirely. Marandi found option 3. Go on their programs, refuse their framing. Speak directly to the billions watching on social media who are sick of being told what to think by the same outlets that sold them WMDs in Iraq, humanitarian intervention in Libya, and moderate rebels in Syria. And let the clips spread organically through networks Western intelligence agencies don't control and can't shut down. The interviewer in that viral segment kept trying to interrupt, kept trying to redirect, kept trying to impose the usual framework where Iran must justify its existence while Western actions are assumed legitimate by default. Marandi just calmly waited for the interruptions to end, then continued making his point with specific dates, specific quotes, specific costs. The contrast was devastating. One side looked desperate to control the narrative. The other side looked like they were simply stating facts. Here's the technical dimension that changes everything. 20 years ago, this interview would have aired once on British TV, maybe gotten a brief write-up in a few newspapers, then disappeared into the memory hole. The gatekeepers would have decided it wasn't newsworthy. End of story. But in 2024, the interview lives on Twitter, on Telegram channels with millions of subscribers, on YouTube reaction videos, on TikTok with subtitles in 15 languages. The gatekeepers no longer control distribution. Iranian media strategy shifted fundamentally in the past 3 years. Instead of trying to build their own version of CNN that nobody outside Iran would watch, they started sending articulate English-speaking representatives onto Western platforms with a simple mission: speak to the global audience directly, ignore the interviewer's framing, know that the clips will circulate far beyond the original broadcast. It's asymmetric information warfare, and it's working. Western intelligence agencies noticed. 3 days after the Marandi interview went viral, British media regulators launched an investigation into whether the segment violated impartiality rules. Think about that for a second. Not an investigation into fabricated claims. An investigation into whether giving an Iranian academic airtime without sufficient hostile framing violated broadcast standards. The panic is visible. Let me show you what the Pentagon is leaving out of their analysis of Iranian influence operations. They're still thinking in terms of RT and Sputnik, state-funded media outlets trying to compete directly with CNN and BBC. That's the last war. The current war is about individuals with institutional backing who go into hostile media environments and perform well enough that organic social sharing does the distribution work. No expensive satellite infrastructure needed, no broadcasting licenses required, just competent people and a smartphone recording the interview. Now, here's where this connects to something much bigger than one viral interview. This is part of a pattern visible across every major conflict zone in the past 5 years. In Ukraine, Russian officials stopped trying to convince Western audiences through RT and started doing long-form interviews on independent podcasts that circulate to millions without media gatekeepers involved. In Gaza, Palestinian voices bypass traditional news cycles entirely through direct social media documentation that accumulates billions of views before any news editor decides if it's a story. The information architecture that gave Washington decisive narrative advantage for 3 decades is breaking down. Not because America stopped being good at propaganda, because the distribution channels they controlled became optional. You can now reach 50 million people in 72 hours with a single interview if your message resonates with populations that feel underrepresented by mainstream Western coverage. That's a structural shift, not a temporary glitch. China is watching this extremely carefully. Beijing's own media operations have historically been clumsy and unconvincing to foreign audiences, but they're studying the Marandi model. Send articulate, Western-educated representatives into hostile media environments. Let them perform. Let the clips circulate. Don't try to control the distribution. Just make sure your message is clear and your representative doesn't crack under pressure. The technology and global frustration with Western media dominance do the rest. The math section that reveals just how unsustainable Western information dominance has become. The BBC, CNN, and major U.S. networks spend approximately $4 billion annually on international news operations. That's studios, satellites, bureaus, correspondents, everything. Iran's entire budget for English-language media operations, roughly $200 million. That's a 20-to-1 spending advantage for the West. But here's what changed. The Marandi interview cost Iran essentially zero in distribution costs. The Western networks paid to host him. Social media users did the distribution for free. Organic reach, 50 million people. If CNN wanted to reach 50 million people with a specific message, the advertising cost alone would exceed $10 million. Iran got it for the price of one professor's time and a camera phone recording the TV screen. The cost asymmetry now favors the underdog. Read that again slowly. Western outlets spend $4 billion trying to maintain narrative control. A single well-performed interview that costs nothing to distribute reaches more people in the target demographics than a month of expensive broadcasting. That's not a sustainable equation. The West cannot outspend its way out of this. The distribution advantage they paid billions to build over decades just evaporated because young people in Cairo and Karachi get their news from Twitter and Telegram, not from CNN international packages that cost millions to produce. Replacement asymmetry in narrative infrastructure. Western media's credibility with Global South audiences has been declining for years. Iraq WMDs, Libya intervention, Syria coverage. Every major conflict of the past 2 decades left millions of people in Africa, Asia, and Latin America deeply skeptical of Western journalism. That credibility doesn't get rebuilt with more money. It's gone. Meanwhile, voices like Marandi arrive with no legacy credibility burden. They're not asking you to forget their lies from 2003. They're just asking you to listen to what they're saying today and decide for yourself. The economic drain this creates for Western information operations is brutal. Every time a Marandi-style interview goes viral, it forces Western outlets to spend resources on response, fact-checking, damage control, algorithm manipulation to reduce reach. That's defensive spending. Meanwhile, Iran and other nations can just keep sending representatives onto Western platforms, knowing that some percentage will perform well and go viral at zero marginal cost. The attacker is spending nothing. The defender is hemorrhaging credibility and budget simultaneously. Now zoom out to the geopolitical chessboard and watch what this means for great power competition. China's approach to information warfare is evolving. For years, Beijing tried to build Xinhua and CGTN into credible competitors to CNN. Hundreds of millions spent, negligible audience outside China. But Chinese strategists are now studying what Iran accidentally discovered. You don't need your own distribution network if you can use theirs. Expect Chinese academics, officials, and carefully selected spokespeople to start appearing more frequently on Western news programs and podcasts. Not shouting. Not defensive, just calmly presenting alternative perspectives with specific evidence while knowing the audience is global and the distribution is organic. Beijing has thousands of Western-educated officials fluent in English who can execute this playbook. Once they start deploying this strategy at scale, Western narrative dominance in Asia collapses the same way it's collapsing in the Middle East. Russia learned this lesson earlier through different means. After RT and Sputnik got blocked in Europe, Russian officials shifted to long-form podcast appearances, Telegram channels, and direct social media engagement. Less polished than Iranian academic interviews, but same principle. Bypass the gatekeepers, speak to the audience directly, let distribution happen organically through platforms Western intelligence can monitor but can't fully control without looking authoritarian themselves. The Global South is drawing very specific conclusions from the Marandi moment. The message transmitting through intellectual circles from Jakarta to Johannesburg is straightforward. Western media will never represent you fairly. Stop trying to convince them. Stop accepting their frameworks. Just be competent, be calm, and speak directly to the global audience that's tired of being told what to think by the same people who lied about every war for 20 years. This creates a permission structure. If an Iranian professor can go viral by simply refusing to accept CNN's framing, then Brazilian academics can do it on China coverage, South African officials can do it on Ukraine, Indian analysts can do it on Western climate hypocrisy. The Marandi template is replicable, and every successful replication further erodes the monopoly that gave Washington information dominance for 3 decades. Middle Eastern governments that previously feared Western media criticism are recalculating. If public opinion in the Global South shifts decisively away from Western narratives, then IMF pressure matters less, World Bank conditions carry less weight, and even military aid comes with less leverage because the information environment no longer amplifies Western preferences by default. That's not a small shift. That's tectonic. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, all U.S. partners are watching. They see Iran getting positive viral moments through articulate spokespeople, while their own expensive PR campaigns fall flat because everyone knows they're purchased. The lesson: authenticity matters more than production value now. A calm academic stating uncomfortable truths outperforms a slick commercial every time in the algorithmic recommendation engines that actually control reach. Let me show you what this means for American strategic planning going forward. For 30 years, the U.S. could bomb a country, frame the narrative favorably, and watch global public opinion either support the action or stay neutral. Iraq had some initial opposition, but by the time boots were on the ground, large segments of global public opinion had been prepared by information dominance. That capability is dying. The next major U.S. military intervention will face a completely different information environment. Imagine the U.S. launches strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. Within minutes, Iranian officials are on every platform explaining the strike in detail, showing footage, making their case directly to billions of people. Not through Al Jazeera, not through intermediaries, directly. Meanwhile, American explanations have to flow through media outlets that half the world's population already distrusts as propaganda. Who wins that information battle? Not the side with the bigger military budget. The strategic implication is profound. If you can't control the narrative after military action, the costs of military action increase. International pressure builds faster. Sanctions coalitions are harder to maintain. Even allies start hedging because their own populations are seeing alternative narratives they find more credible than official American statements. Power that was essentially free for Washington, narrative dominance, now carries a cost, and that cost is rising every month. American planners have a choice. They can try to rebuild information dominance through censorship and algorithmic control, which will look authoritarian and backfire with younger audiences globally. Or they can accept that the era of monopolistic narrative control is over and adjust strategy accordingly, which means more diplomacy, fewer military interventions, greater emphasis on actual credibility through actions rather than words. The Marandi interview didn't cause this shift, but it revealed how far it's already progressed. What burned in those 72 hours of viral circulation wasn't just one interviewer's credibility, it was the assumption that Western media still sets the terms of global discourse. That assumption is dead. Every strategist from Beijing to Brasilia to Tehran knows it. Only Washington seems to be pretending otherwise. Here are my 3 predictions with timeframes attached. First, within 6 months, you will see Chinese officials start appearing on major Western podcasts using the exact same calm precision playbook Marandi demonstrated. Beijing will deploy this at scale. Second, within 1 year, at least 3 Global South nations will establish spokesperson training programs specifically designed to teach officials how to perform in hostile Western media environments. The Marandi template becomes institutionalized. Third, within 2 years, a major U.S. military operation fails to achieve its objectives primarily because the information environment has shifted so decisively that international support never materializes. Drop your prediction in the comments. Which happens first, the Chinese spokesperson wave, the formal training programs, or the failed intervention due to information environment? Tell me, because I read every single one, and I want to know if you see a different sequence unfolding. If this gave you a framework for understanding modern information warfare that mainstream coverage misses entirely, if you now see why one interview can carry more strategic weight than 1,000 press releases, share this with one person who still thinks media dominance is just about production budgets. The next video examines something even more dangerous than narrative collapse: It's about what happens when the weapons themselves stop working the way American doctrine assumes they will. Subscribe so you're there when it drops. The pattern you just learned about information warfare has an exact parallel in kinetic warfare, and the math there is even more brutal.